Hello and welcome. This is Deep Dive and I'm Tiffany Meier. How does the Texas lawsuit and the battle for independence in 1776 relate? We'll touch on that later, but first, some updates. Trump's 2018 executive order can only go into effect if there's foreign interference in the election. While the Office of the Director of National Intelligence released a statement saying the intelligence community will not hit the deadline for reporting on foreign threats during the November election. It said the director, John Ratcliffe, was notified on Wednesday, 2 days before the December 18th deadline for the report. It stated the intelligence community has received relevant reporting since the election, and a number of agencies have not finished coordinating on the product. A spokeswoman for the office added that Ratcliffe remains committed to a fast release of the report. The report relates to an executive order the president signed in 2018. The order expects the DNI to assess the maximum extent ascertainable whether any attempts at interference took place and give details of this. In the 2018 order, President Trump declared election interference a national emergency. It included the threat of unauthorized accessing of election and campaign infrastructure or the covert distribution of propaganda and disinformation to undermine public confidence in U.S. elections. It also mentioned foreign actors altering the outcome or vote tabulation. Following the DNI's delivery of the report, the Attorney General and the Secretary of Homeland Security would have another 45 days to evaluate the report and make a determination. One outcome of the determination is automatic sanctions on bad actors named in the report. So why is the report being delayed? Well, according to Richard Grinnell, the former acting director of National Intelligence, Ratcliffe is standing up for career analysts who want their views to be accurately reflected. He added, in other words, fighting to keep intelligence from being politicized. Grinnell shared a report which said, citing an anonymous source, that Ratcliffe was not signing off on the report unless it more fully reflected the national security threat posed by China's attempts to influence the outcome of the 2020 election. Grinnell said John Ratcliffe has access to the most sensitive intel. This is important. He's not the only one saying there's disputes. Fox and OANN are also reporting disputes over including China. Sources told Fox News there are disagreements over China. Some say China was involved in the 2020 election. Others say China's role should be minimized. Now, about how China could be influencing, senior investigative reporter and host of Crossroads, Joshua Phillip, said in an interview with American thought leaders.
The Chinese Communist Party has a saying when it comes to their warfare, psychological warfare operations, and other forms of subversion. Strangle you with your own systems. In other words, observing how different countries operate, what is controversial within their systems, how does their system function, how can we use those systems to twist things around, to cause chaos, to mess things up, to use it against them. You say you believe in free speech? We'll have protests in your own backyard calling you out. You say you believe in free press? Well, we'll start up state-run media in your country, and we'll use those state-run media to lie to your population, to spread our propaganda. That's what they do. You believe in free markets? How about we bring state-run companies that can sell below cost and put your companies out of business and take over your industries? That's what they're doing, right? Strangle you with your own system.
And on big tech, 10 states are suing Google for abusing market power. Texas, backed by 9 other states, filed a lawsuit against Alphabet Incorporated-owned Google on Wednesday, accusing it of breaking antitrust laws and how it runs its online advertising business. The 9 states that join Texas are Arkansas, Indiana, Kentucky, Missouri, Mississippi, South Dakota, North Dakota, Utah, and Idaho. The antitrust lawsuit was filed by Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, who said in a Facebook video that Google eliminated its competition and crowned itself the king of online advertising.
Google repeatedly used its monopolistic power to control pricing, engage in market collusions to rig auctions, in a tremendous violation of justice.
Google called the Texas lawsuit meritless and said, "We will strongly defend ourselves from his baseless claims in court." Facebook did not immediately respond to a request for comment. The Texas lawsuit is the second major complaint from regulators against Google and the fourth in a series of federal and state lawsuits aimed at reining in alleged bad behavior by big tech platforms. The states asked Google, which is owned by Alphabet and controls a third of the global online advertising industry, to compensate them for damages and is seeking structural relief, which is usually interpreted as forcing a company to divest some of its assets. Wednesday's action also raises the legal stakes for Google, which is now expected to face a third antitrust lawsuit from another group of attorneys general on Thursday, according to a source familiar with the matter, over anti-competitive behavior. Now, if the name Ken Paxton rings a bell, he's the one that filed a Texas lawsuit asking the Supreme Court to sue 4 states, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Michigan, and Wisconsin, on the grounds that these states unconstitutionally changed election laws and asking to overturn the election results there. It garnered massive media attention before the Supreme Court dismissed the case, on the grounds that one state can't sue another on how it runs its election in its own state. Speaking of the Texas lawsuit, President Trump repeatedly called for wisdom and courage. After the Supreme Court's decision, Trump called out the courts, saying, "No wisdom, no courage." Now, if we look at history, America never lacked courageous people. Throughout history, when the country was at stake, Americans would stand up and fight, as this country is a country built on courage. As the national anthem says, America is the land of the free and the home of the brave. In 1776, the War of Independence was in its second year. Although a government was formed and an army was established, the 13 colonies had not yet declared independence at this time. By the end of June, 45 huge British battleships, each with 64 heavy guns, were headed for New York, which in those days would have been like today's aircraft carriers. Besides that, another 350 British battleships were speeding across the Atlantic to assemble. The British thought that such a show would scare off the poorly equipped colonial militia of farmers, blacksmiths, shopkeepers, and ranchers, but it turned out to inspire greater courage and the fighting spirit. On July 2nd, delegates met in Philadelphia for an emergency session. On July 4th, the Continental Congress issued the Declaration of Independence, formally declaring independence from Great Britain. It starts with these sentences: "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." When the Declaration of Independence was read on the battlefield, colonial soldiers were overwhelmed by the fact that their rights did not come from a king or from some government, but were divinely endowed, and those rights were sacred and inalienable. They would thus fight for freedom and happiness. The colonial soldiers fought bravely, but eventually withdrew from New York because of the disparity in power. By 1777, several major towns in North America were occupied by the British, and the colonial soldiers were driven into the wilderness. The fledgling United States faced a life and death situation. At the critical moment, General Washington established an independent corps of light infantry, appointing Daniel Morgan as its commander. This team of about 500 riflemen was equipped with the most advanced long rifles in the world at the time and had flexible strategies. It worked well and gave the British quite the headache. During the battles of Saratoga between September and October 1777, Timothy Murphy, the best sniper in the regiment, climbed a tall tree and aimed 3 shots at a British general, the third of which hit British General Fraser squarely, turning history on its head as the British were quickly routed. Soon after, British General Burgoyne announced his surrender, which was known as the Victory of Saratoga. This victory was not only a great morale booster, but also gave the Patriots an important ally in France. In the winter of the same year in Valley Forge, seeing the spread of smallpox among the troops and the soldiers falling one by one, General Washington made a bold decision to implement the inoculation technique that the Army doctors had learned from the slaves, collecting pus from smallpox patients and inoculating the soldiers. It was a life or death risk, but General Washington's gamble succeeded, and smallpox was quickly contained. 4 years later, 8,000 British troops walked out of Yorktown and laid down their guns in front of ragged American troops. 2 years later, September 1783, the British king recognized American independence. Now, if we look at the present, some are drawing similarities. But instead of a battlefield filled with the smoke of gunpowder, we now have voting machines with unexplainable anomalies. Some have raised the comparison: if the votes are stolen, then next is the freedoms of the American people that will be stolen. While some view the Supreme Court's dismissal of the Texas lawsuit as disappointing, others see it as a rallying cry. Like in 1776, when the British battleships showed the colonial soldiers freedom doesn't come from the king, it can be inferred then the Supreme Court showed Americans now that freedom doesn't come from the judicial system, but rather from Americans themselves, we the people after all. Like former Kansas Attorney General Phil Kline said at the Amistad Project hearing yesterday, America is on track to totalitarianism. Why aren't Americans fighting back?
Folks, that's totalitarianism. That is thuggery. It is stunning that America hasn't risen up with a uniform voice and state that when the state threatens people who are elected to be the voice of the people with criminal prosecution, if they speak on the people's behalf, should be arrested. That's not the United States of America.
Despite the Texas lawsuit ultimately getting dismissed, it garnered a lot of support along the way. Attorney generals from 19 states and 129 Republican lawmakers all supported it. Some say the American spirit has died. But this clip of West Point cadets chanting USA, USA after President Trump enters seems to suggest it still exists. There are those who still cheer for what the country was founded on: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But what do you think? Let me know below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for the latest updates. Thanks for tuning in to Deep Dive. I'm Tiffany Meier, and see you soon.